When it comes to managing anxiety, prioritizing future happiness and positivity can make a big difference. By focusing on the positive aspects of life, such as relationships, hobbies, and personal goals, you can cultivate a sense of fulfillment and purpose that can help counteract feelings of worry or distress. Similarly, directing your attention toward the future can help you stay motivated and engaged in pursuing those long-term goals and aspirations that inspire you. By keeping your eyes firmly fixed on the horizon and prioritizing the things that bring you joy and fulfillment, you can create a sense of momentum and progress that can help to keep anxiety at bay. Consider someone who finds happiness and contentment important things to aim for in life. Even when they do feel happy, they wonder if they should be feeling even happier. They may read a lot of self-help books or do their best to achieve some ideal state of mind where everything finally is as it should be. You can picture how such a person invariably makes themselves more unhappy. In fact, a study published in the journal Emotion found precisely this. When people overemphasize the project of being happy, they actually tend to worsen their mood. In other words, trying too hard can backfire and make you miserable. Just like the silver medalists we considered in an earlier section, people striving for happiness may find that they frequently fall short. The study's authors say, valuing happiness could be self-defeating because the more people value happiness, the more likely they will feel disappointed. Paradoxically, therefore, valuing happiness may lead people to be less happy just when happiness is within reach. It's a form of what is now understood to be toxic positivity. The irony is that the more relentlessly we pursue happiness and well-being, the more intolerant we become to everything that seemingly doesn't fit the picture. We may become less adept at listening to others and empathizing, and instead rush in to cheer them or look for a silver lining. Perhaps even worse, we become less able to acknowledge how we feel as people and deny, downplay, or ignore genuine negative feelings, meaning they never get processed or resolved. A recent 2020 study by Humphrey et al. In the Journal of Positive Psychology identified two general orientations that people could have. They separated 496 people into these two groups. The first was people who prioritized happiness, and the second prioritized positivity. What's the difference? Those who valued happiness were more likely to agree with statements like, I believe I've failed in life if I'm depressed or anxious, and I'm concerned about my happiness, even when I feel happy. People who valued positivity, on the other hand, were more likely to agree with statements like, I notice and choose to nurture my positive emotions. Comparing the groups, the researchers noticed that those who value happiness actually tend to feel it less often and have difficulty knowing what to do with negative emotions. Those who value positivity believe that negative emotions are just a part of life, and consequently, they don't feel like something is wrong when they don't feel happy all the time. Ultimately, it comes down to expectations. The first group saw well-being as a state that excluded negative emotions, while the second saw that negative emotions actually had a place in a happy, well-adjusted life. This difference in perception turned out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. While happiness and positivity seem pretty similar on the surface, they are quite different approaches. We cannot control the events in our lives, or the random moods we fall into, or how other people act. We cannot avoid negative feelings around loss or disappointment in life. But we do have control over what we focus on and how we choose to react. This is positivity. So if you one day feel quite negative or depressed, you might be tempted to think immediately, this isn't supposed to be this way. I should be happy. You focus on what you feel, and this actually disempowers you further. But you could also think, this is how I feel. That's just how it is. But I can take steps to make things better right now. The switch then happens when we change focus from how we feel or who we are to what we can do. But the emotion study found out more. When we try to increase our in-the-moment happiness, we may also inadvertently make ourselves feel worse for similar reasons. We merely confront again and again a present that doesn't live up to what we think it should be. What's the alternative? Well, according to the authors, take steps today that you willingly know will create happiness for you in the future. To do this, you can engage in happiness habits rather than one-off activities you hope will generate the right state of mind right now. When you exercise, reach out to others, act with generosity, or take a few steps towards a future goal, you don't create much immediate happiness in the moment. But what you do is make it far more likely that you'll be happier tomorrow and in the future. This is a question of reframing our happiness project. Rather than focusing on instant gratification, we can rest in the knowledge that we can always take steps in the right direction, laying stones on the pathway to a future that, with each action, looks a little better. So happiness is more of a byproduct of your conscious, repeated, and habitual action than it is a momentary flash of the right chemicals in your brain right in the present moment. These findings can seem very counterintuitive for those who've been taught to strive constantly for a present moment that is, in essence, perfect. But if we're honest with ourselves, we may see how this perfect moment is more of a harmful fiction than a realistic goal to center in life. Humphrey et al.'s analysis concluded that the key was to value negative emotions rather than to try desperately to avoid them. We can choose to focus on the positive feelings without denigrating the negative ones. This has been The Anxiety Cure, 37 science-based 5-minute methods to beat back the blues, stay positive, and finally relax. Written by Nick Trenton, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2023 by Nick Trenton. Production copyright by Nick Trenton.